The idea that a Formula One team is based out of a country that bans motorsport is somewhat comical, but mainly endearing. The fact that they've said screw the power, we'll do whatever we want, should serve as inspiration that if you want it, then just go ahead and do it. Forget the fine print, except when it matters. And the Sauber Formula One team definitely learned that the hard way at certain points in its 30-year life. In 2014, Dutch F1 driver and meme warlord Guido van der Garde was the reserve driver for that team after a year of hell of trying to make sense of the drowning Caterham team. Not that Sauber was faring any better, but they would be keeping his dream alive, for by June that year, they guaranteed Guido one of the seats for the forthcoming 2015 season. With that type of assurance then, you'd imagine that he'd be feeling pretty relaxed about everything. I mean, he didn't have to go and beg and plead to be in another F1 team for next season, because that season was secured for him. All he could do now was prepare himself as best he could and get ready for an assault at the 2015 Formula One season. Of course, both of the 2014 drivers, Adrian Sutil and Esteban Gutierrez, would be given the boot at the end of the year to make way for the new recruits. November came by and the new lineup was announced. Marcus Ericsson from Sweden would be paired up with Felipe Nasser from Brazil, alongside Guido van der Garde. But rather quickly, people began to notice a slight logistical problem. Now, math was never my strong suit, but to my recollection, 3 was a bigger number than 2. 3 drivers were signed, and yet there were only 2 cars available. This became evident too with the Sauber hierarchy, and thus told van der Garde to get lost. And this is where it starts to get good. As soon as he received this news, he immediately took issue with it. I mean, who could blame him? He took his case to the Swiss Tribunal Court and began his fight to get his keister into one of those Sauber cars for 2015. He had a case and, ironically, he had experience in dealing with contract malarkey. Back in 2007, he was contracted to Super Aguri as their test and reserve driver for the season. And back then, it was a team that was starting to rise up and is a team that I so dearly miss. But he didn't respect them enough, because 2 months later, he shocked the whole team by announcing his defection to the Spiker F1 team. A little bit of patriotism, perhaps. But when Super Aguri took their case to the Contract Recognition Board, it did put Guido's Formula One career in jeopardy, but eventually they settled. Guido tested for Spiker and was rewarded with news that the team would not survive 1 year in this game, and that Vijay Mallya, the billionaire human blimp that bought the team, decided that there was no place for Guido to be there. Fast forward to 2015, and he would once again find himself in the midst of disputes over pieces of paper. When the Grand Prix circus rocked up to Melbourne for the first race of the 2015 season, van der Garde took his case to the Supreme Court of Victoria. This was a canny approach, given the location, but Sauber's lawyers rocked up ready to battle, with Rodney Garrett saying that because Guido had not tested the new Sauber, putting him in it for the season would result in an unacceptable risk of physical harm or even death. Now, let's calm down here, Rodney. Alright, this is Guido van der Garde we're talking about here, not Pastor Mel Nardo. They used every excuse in the book to make it appear that if they put Guido in the car, it might result in a disaster that would see motor racing banned throughout the entire world. Again, ignoring the fact that Guido was a world karting champion, a World Series champion, had a full season of Formula One racing under his belt, and had tested with the team the whole of last year. They made him their reserve driver, and at one point, they were prepared to let him race for them. But now he can't hang? Whilst the likes of Will the Lad Stevens and Max Chilton could just be called up at a moment's notice? Well, I guess we gotta take your word for it. On March 11, the decision was made. They upheld the claim of the Swiss Tribunal Court and ruled in favour of van der Garde. What's more, the ruling entailed that van der Garde would be in that seat for the entire season and not just the first round. Sauber immediately appealed. What a shocker. And it must have hurt to lose a court case in a country that couldn't win a war against birds that can't fly. They were rocked, however, when said appeal was dismissed, saying that the appeal was not in the interest of justice and that they didn't feel there was anything wrong with the verdict that was initially given out. Sauber were also required to pay van der Garde's legal fees, and now Sauber was still stuck with 3 drivers in 2 seats. Unless they had a sidecar, they were kinda screwed. Guido turned up in the paddock, waltzed into the Sauber garage, and stole Marcus Ericsson's race suit, which was mainly down to a seat fitting, but I'd like to think that there was also a bit of a statement in his intent. But his fun was curtailed, with news that he could not partake in FP1, as he had not renewed his super license in time. In fact, none of the Saubers went out in the first practice session, for fear that if they did, without Guido in one of those cars, they'd find themselves in the basement of Parliament House having their fingernails pulled out. Come FP2, the cars did go out, but Guido was in neither of them. Ericsson and NASA were driving the cars. This was thanks to Bernie Ecclestone, who, realizing what was at stake, decided that Formula One did not need any more bad publicity. That was something he could accomplish just fine all on his own. The next day, it was announced that Guido would not partake in the Australian Grand Prix and would instead seek a more permanent solution for the future. 3 days after that, it was announced that by mutual consent, he would not race for the team that year in lieu of a $16 million settlement. But knowing that his Formula One career was almost certainly over, he took to social media and dished out a statement which resembles something you would see after your partner says, "We need to talk." He admonished Sauber team principal Monish Kaltenborn for not allowing him to race, despite having a valid contract, and for creating a toxic atmosphere within that team. Guido essentially said he chose to forego racing, allowed the team to compete without their assets being seized, and let the drivers have their debuts, because if that didn't happen, all in the pursuit of justice, he wouldn't be able to live with himself, knowing all the people that would be affected. Give this guy a Nobel Peace Prize. Sauber fired right back at Guido's statement, right after saying that they wouldn't fire back. There would be no more legal action between the two, as everyone involved realized that Sauber's financial situation was such that it resembled that of a grocery store manager with a betting disorder. In the end, Guido van der Garde never raced in Formula One again. Sauber is still alive, just bouncing from car maker to car maker to car maker, but for 2015 at least, they did have a decently successful season. Felipe Nasser scoring 5th on debut after a 2014 season where Sauber scored no points at all was a dream come true for them. However, the important lessons to take from the story is this: don't sign contracts you can't honor, and that 3 is a bigger number than 2.